Chapter 1. New Walls, Old Wounds. The apartment smelled like paint and old dust. Not musty exactly, just neglected. Like it hadn't been lived in for a while, which suited Clara Monroe just fine. She didn't want echoes of anyone else's life hanging in the corners of her new beginning. She had enough ghosts of her own. The movers had left half an hour ago, their boots scuffing the hardwood and their grunts echoing up the narrow stairwell. Now it was quiet. Too quiet. Clara stood in the middle of the small living room, surrounded by towers of cardboard boxes, each one labeled in her tidy, all-caps handwriting, kitchen, bedroom, books, bathroom, essentials. She stared at the last one for a long second. Essentials. The word felt like a joke. What was essential now? She was 34, newly divorced, and hollow in all the places she used to be full. Her marriage had unraveled like a cheap sweater, one loose thread at a time, until all that was left was a pile of tangled lies and her own stunned silence. She sank down onto the beige sofa bought in a hurry off Facebook Marketplace and let her head fall back against the cushions. The ceiling was cracked. A spider was claiming the corner. She didn't care. It was her ceiling now, her spider, her life. The silence pressed in, heavy and unfamiliar. In the old house, she'd grown used to the background noise of her husband's world. Conference calls, espresso machines, the occasional fake laugh over the phone. Even his infidelity had had a rhythm to it. A pattern. Thursday night client dinners, weekend strategy retreats. Looking back, it was insulting how predictable he'd been. 3 years with the same woman, her lawyer had said, disbelief curling around each word. She even sent them Christmas cards together. Clara's jaw clenched. No, she wouldn't think about that now. She stood and headed to the kitchen to unpack the essentials box, only to be greeted by a small, ominous pool of water gathering beneath the sink. Her stomach dropped. "You have got to be kidding me," she muttered, crouching to open the cabinet doors. A slow, persistent drip tapped against the wood. Something was leaking, badly. She reached for a dish towel and realized with mounting dread that she didn't know where she'd packed them, or if she'd packed them at all. She sat back on her heels, water soaking into her leggings, and fought the urge to cry. Not because of the leak, not even because the place was falling apart, but because it felt like everything she touched broke lately. Get up, she told herself. Figure it out. That's when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Light, quick, coming from the apartment next door. Clara hesitated, then stood and wiped her wet hands on her pants. Pride warred with desperation for a beat before she exhaled sharply and crossed the small foyer to the front door. She opened it and knocked on the one beside hers. A few seconds passed, then the sound of a lock turning, followed by the door easing open just a few inches. The man who appeared was unexpected, mid to late 20s maybe. Messy black hair, tired eyes that were a deep shade of brown, almost black. He wore a plain gray hoodie and looked like he'd just woken up or hadn't been to sleep yet. "Hi," Clara said, already regretting this. "I'm so sorry to bother you. I just moved in next door and I think I have a leak under my kitchen sink. Do you—" She hesitated, suddenly aware of how ridiculous this sounded. "Do you maybe know how to fix something like that?" The man blinked at her, clearly caught off guard. Then, to her surprise, he nodded. Yeah, I can take a look." "Oh, thank you. Really. I'm Clara, by the way." "Evan," he said, voice low but not unfriendly. "Hang on." He disappeared briefly and returned with a small red toolbox. Clara stepped aside to let him in. He followed her in quietly, gaze taking in the boxes and chaos without comment. She led him to the kitchen, feeling awkwardly exposed. "Sorry, everything's still a mess. I haven't even found my towels yet." "It's fine," Evan said, already crouching in front of the sink. He opened the cabinet and whistled under his breath. "Looks like the compression fitting's loose. I'll tighten it. Might need plumber's tape if it keeps dripping." Clara nodded like she understood. She didn't. While he worked, she leaned against the counter, arms crossed. The silence between them wasn't quite comfortable, but it wasn't unpleasant either. "Do you work around here?" she asked eventually. "Night shifts. Warehouse job." "I sleep during the day. That's probably why we didn't run into each other earlier." "I figured this place was empty when I came to tour it," she said. "It was so quiet." He shrugged. "I keep to myself." And she could tell he meant it. There was a stillness to Evan that wasn't cold, exactly, but withdrawn, like someone who'd taught himself to live inside his own head. After a few more minutes, he stood and wiped his hands on a rag from his toolbox. That should hold for now. Just keep an eye on it tonight. Thank you. Clara meant it. She wasn't used to kindness that didn't come with conditions or hidden meanings anymore. Evan gave a short nod, then looked like he was about to leave. But then he paused. You okay? He asked, not quite looking at her. Moving can be a lot. Clara blinked. The question caught her off guard. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Yeah, it's just a new chapter, right? Evan nodded again, slowly. Sure. But she could tell he didn't believe her. After he left, Clara stood at the sink, staring at the spot he'd just fixed. The water had stopped dripping. It was a small thing, barely even a gesture, but for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely invisible. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Silence. Clara stared at the paper coffee tray in her hands, second-guessing every part of this. 2 cups. One black, one with a splash of oat milk and cinnamon. Hers. The black was for Evan, assuming he drank coffee. Assuming he didn't think this was weird. Assuming he even opened the door. She almost turned back. But then she remembered the way he'd crouched under her sink, fixing the leak without hesitation or small talk. The way he'd asked, softly, if she was okay. It was the first moment since moving in that hadn't felt like treading water. So here she was. Clara knocked. A pause. Then the lock clicked and Evan appeared, hair damp like he'd just showered. He wore a dark t-shirt this time and the same quiet, unreadable expression. Hey, she said, lifting the tray like an offering. Peace coffee, for fixing the great sink flood of day 1. Evan blinked down at the cups, then back at her. You didn't have to. I know, but I wanted to. He took the tray from her hands, cautious but not impolite. Thanks. Clara lingered, shifting her weight. I should probably go unpack more stuff, or cry into a box labeled miscellaneous. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. You can come in, he said finally, stepping aside. Clara hesitated just long enough to question her judgment, then walked through the door. His apartment was sparse but clean. No pictures on the walls. A bookshelf half filled with dog-eared novels and old sketch pads. A beat-up acoustic guitar leaning against the couch. The air smelled faintly of cedarwood and something herbal. Maybe tea or incense, though she didn't see either. He handed her the oat milk cup and gestured to the couch. Clara sat carefully, trying not to feel too self-conscious. You play? She asked, nodding to the guitar. Used to, Evan replied, sitting across from her. Sometimes still do. He didn't elaborate, and Clara didn't push. They drank in relative silence for a few minutes. It was odd how not awkward it felt. The quiet between them had weight, but not pressure, like they were both carrying something they didn't want to put down just yet. She glanced at the bookshelf again. You like fiction? I like escaping my own thoughts for a while, he said without flinching. Books help. Clara looked down into her coffee. Yeah, I get that. Something shifted then. Not a big moment, no dramatic reveal, just a thread pulling gently between them. Over the next week, their paths crossed more often. Sometimes it was coincidence. Other times it felt like fate. Late-night runs to the mailbox turned into leaning against the wall in the hallway, talking softly so they didn't wake the other tenants. One night, she brought him banana bread. Another, he knocked on her door with a toolbox. Not because anything was broken, but because he'd just gotten around to tightening the faucets. They began sharing the rooftop on sleepless nights. It wasn't much. A square of concrete surrounded by waist-high rails and a few potted plants someone had long since given up on. But up there, the city hummed quietly in the background, and the sky felt just wide enough to breathe under. Clara would sip wine straight from the bottle. Evan drank tea from a chipped ceramic mug. They rarely touched, rarely even sat close. But the energy between them was undeniable. One night, as they both stared out over the city, Clara spoke without thinking. I found out about her because of an Uber receipt. Evan turned to her, brows drawing together slightly. She gave a humorless laugh. He left it on the kitchen counter, took her to a hotel in the city. I thought it was mine at first. Same area we used to go to. Same time of night. But it wasn't. I looked it up. Different hotel. Different everything. Evan didn't say anything, just waited. I confronted him. He didn't even lie. Just said, I didn't think you'd go through my stuff anymore. Like I was the one who'd crossed the line. Clara took a long drink of wine. That was 6 months ago. Took me 4 to actually file. I think part of me hoped he'd beg, or cry, or something. He just said, "Do what you need to do," and that was it. The air between them stretched taut, but Evan didn't offer pity. He didn't offer advice either, just presence. And for the first time, Clara didn't feel like she had to fill the silence. Eventually, she glanced at him. "What about you? Anyone in your rear view?" His jaw tensed. "Not really," he said quietly. "Someone I used to know a long time ago." "You miss her?" "I miss who I was with her," he said, then looked away. That's not the same thing. It was the most he'd given her yet, and somehow the most lonely. One evening, it rained. Not a storm, just a soft, persistent drizzle that darkened the pavement and made the world feel heavier. Clara stepped out to take the trash and found Evan sitting just inside the building entrance, hood pulled over his head, earbuds in. She tapped the glass. He looked up, surprised, and pulled one earbud out. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just needed air." She sat beside him without asking. The concrete was cold. Rain misted against the glass. They sat there side by side, legs barely touching. "Do you ever feel like everything inside you's too loud?" she asked suddenly. Evan didn't answer at first. Then he nodded once. "All the time." She looked down at her hand, resting on her knee, fingers tapping absently. Then at his, calloused, resting on the ledge between them. There was only an inch of space. Without thinking, she moved her hand slightly closer. Their pinkies brushed. Just for a second, she pulled away like she'd touched fire. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, standing. "I should go." Evan didn't stop her, just looked up, quiet and unreadable. Clara fled up the stairs, heart pounding in her throat, not from rejection, but because something was happening between them, something quiet, real, and far too soon, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. Not yet. Chapter 3. The pretend that felt too real. It started with a knock at the door. Sharp, decisive, and too familiar. Clara froze on her way to the kitchen, her mug of tea sloshing as her fingers tightened instinctively. There were knocks you didn't forget, tones that carved themselves into muscle memory, and this one was unmistakable. "David." For a second, she considered ignoring it, pretending she wasn't home. But a second knock, louder, killed that idea. She opened the door. Sure enough, there he was. In a button-down shirt that was too crisp for a casual visit, holding a sad-looking bouquet of white tulips, the kind she used to buy for herself because he never remembered. "Hi, Clara." Her throat felt like sandpaper. "What are you doing here?" I thought we could talk." She didn't answer, just gripped the doorframe like it might hold her up. David smiled, like this was all normal, like he hadn't detonated her world and walked away with clean hands. "I was in the neighborhood, thought maybe enough time had passed." "Enough time for what?" "To be civil," he said, then added, "You look good. The place is humble, but cozy." There it is, Clara thought, that familiar, quiet erosion, compliment with a blade tucked inside. She'd forgotten how disarming he could be when he wanted something. "I don't think this is a good idea," she said, stepping back to close the door. "Clara, come on, just 5 minutes." She opened her mouth to refuse, but then Evan appeared. Not from inside her apartment, but from the hallway, dressed in flannel pajama pants and a black t-shirt, hair rumpled like he'd just woken up. He stopped when he saw them. Clara's heart lurched. Before she could think, she said, "Hey, babe, can you grab my charger from the couch?" Evan blinked, just for a second. Then something flickered in his eyes, and he stepped forward into her doorway, effortlessly slipping into the role. "Sure," he said smoothly, brushing past her with the kind of easy familiarity you didn't fake unless you'd practiced it 100 times. He walked straight into the living room, returned a second later holding her phone, no charger, and wrapped an arm loosely around her shoulders. It was casual, but solid, warm. She leaned into it, grateful and dizzy. David's expression tightened. Evan looked him over, gaze unreadable. "You okay, Clara?" She nodded. "Yeah, David was just leaving." David looked between them. "Didn't realize you moved on so fast." Clara's smile was razor-edged. "Didn't realize you still cared." David's mouth opened, then closed again. The flowers drooped in his hand like a punchline. "Right. Well, glad to see you're happy." "I am," she lied. He left without another word. Evan didn't let go until the elevator doors dinged closed and the hallway fell silent. Then his arm dropped and they both just stood there. Her pulse was still jackhammering in her ears. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave a small nod. "You okay?" "No, but I will be." She stepped back into her apartment and Evan followed, hesitantly, like he wasn't sure if this was a threshold he should cross. But he had already crossed it, hadn't he? The silence inside stretched thin. Evan sat down on the edge of the couch, fingers laced together. Clara stood across from him, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Was that too much? He asked quietly. I didn't mean to. No, she said quickly. You were perfect. The word hung in the air. Perfect. And neither of them knew what to do with it. Clara walked to the kitchen, and in fact, needing motion, needing distance. He used to do that. Show up. Act like the good guy. Just enough kindness to make me second-guess everything. That's how he kept me. Not by force, by confusion. She poured herself a glass of water she didn't want. Her hands were shaking. Evan didn't speak, didn't offer platitudes, just stepped close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. And for a moment, Clara felt the world tilt. The fake boyfriend thing was done. The ex was gone. But Evan was still here, and she was still staring at his mouth. Their hands were close again, closer than the night on the stairs. Just a whisper of air between them. His fingers brushed hers, soft and tentative, their eyes locked. She swayed toward him. Their lips were inches apart when she stopped. Wait, she breathed. Evan froze. Sorry. No, don't be. Her voice cracked. It's not you. He stepped back immediately, giving her space. I don't want to be someone's rebound, she said, swallowing hard. Not again. I can't mistake comfort for something real. Not with you. Evan nodded slowly. His expression was calm, but his eyes, they were all heartbreak and restraint. I get it, he said. You're not a substitute for anyone. Neither am I. Clara's chest ached. You mean a lot more to me than I expected. That scares the hell out of me. He gave a half smile. Yeah, me too. Then he walked toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. I'll be around when you're ready. And then he was gone. Clara stood in the silence, heart thundering, hands cold, and everything inside her pulled in two directions, toward fear and toward him. Clara and Evan's story is just beginning. The longing, the hesitation, the heartbreak that still echoes in quiet spaces. But what happens when the past doesn't stay buried and feelings can't stay unspoken? Part 2 is where it all unravels and begins to rebuild. Make sure to subscribe or follow to be the first to read the next chapter of this slow burn, emotionally charged love story. Love doesn't come easy, but the best stories never do.